Easter Sunday, the Sepulcher Guard's statements. About an hour after the resurrection, Cassius went to Pilate, who was resting on his couch. Full of emotion, Cassius related all that had passed, the trembling of the rock, the descent of the angel, the rolling away of the stone, the empty winding sheet. Jesus, he said, was certainly the Messiah, certainly the Son of God. He was risen. He was no longer in the tomb. Pilate heard every detail with secret terror, but, letting nothing appear, he said to Cassius, "Thou art a visionary. Thou didst act very unwisely by standing in the tomb of the Galilean. His gods have thereby acquired full power over thee, and it was they who conjured up all kinds of magic pictures before thee. I advise thee to say nothing of all this to the high priest, else it will be worse for thee." He pretended to believe that Jesus had been stolen away by the disciples, and that the guards had reported what they did in order to hide their own negligence, or because they were bribed, or even perhaps because they too had been bewitched. When Cassius left, Pilate again offered sacrifice to his gods. 4 of the soldiers returned from the tomb and went directly to Pilate with the same report. But he would listen to nothing more, and sent them to Caiaphas. The other guards went to a large court near the temple in which a number of aged Jews were gathered. These latter consulted together and came to the conclusion that they would, with money and threats, force the guards to report that the disciples had stolen the body of Jesus. But when the guards objected that their companions, who had informed Pilate of the whole affair, would contradict them, the Pharisees promised to make it all right with Pilate. Meanwhile, the 4 guards who had been dismissed by Pilate arrived, but they adhered strictly to the account they had given to the governor. The report of Joseph of Arimathea's deliverance, in some unaccountable way, through the closed prison doors was already noised abroad, and when the Pharisees, wishing to cast upon the soldiers the suspicion of having had an understanding with the disciples for the carrying off of Jesus' body, threatened them with severe punishment if they did not forthwith produce it, the men replied that they could no more do that than could the guard in Joseph of Arimathea's prison bring him back after he had disappeared. They defended themselves stoutly, and by no species of bribery could they be reduced to silence. Yes, they spoke even freely and openly of Friday's iniquitous judgment, and declared that it was on that account the paschal ceremonies had been interrupted. The 4 soldiers were seized and imprisoned. Jesus' enemies spread the report that his body had been stolen by the disciples. And the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Herodians caused the lie to be everywhere propagated, to be published in every synagogue in the whole world, accompanying it with slanderous abuse of Jesus. Their lies profited them little, for after Jesus' resurrection, many souls of holy deceased Jews appeared here and there to those of their descendants still susceptible of grace and holy impressions, and frightened their hearts to conversion. To many of the disciples also who, shaken in faith and disheartened, were dispersed throughout the country, similar apparitions appeared to console and strengthen them in faith. The rising of the dead bodies from their tombs after the death of Jesus had no similarity whatever with the Lord's resurrection. Jesus arose in his renewed, glorified body, walked for some days alive upon the earth, and, in that same body, ascended into heaven in the sight of his friends. But those other bodies were only corpses given to the souls merely as so many coverings. They were again laid down by them to await with us all the resurrection of the last day. Lazarus was raised from the dead, but he really lived and afterward died for the 2nd time. I saw the Jews beginning to purify, to wash and scour the temple. They strewed aromatic herbs, also ashes from the bones of the dead, and offered expiatory sacrifices. They cleared away the rubbish, covered the marks of the earthquake with boards and tapestry, and finished the paschal solemnities interrupted on the day of the feast. With threats of punishment and excommunication, they tried to suppress all remarks and murmurs. They explained the disturbance of the feast and the damage done the temple as effects of the earthquake and the presence of the unclean at the sacrifices. They brought forward something from a vision of Ezekiel upon the risen dead, but I do not now remember how they applied it. Thus they quieted the people, for many had taken part in the crime. But it was only the great crowd of the obstinate and the incorrigible. All the better disposed were converted. They kept silence until Pentecost, when they proclaimed aloud their faith, later also in their native places through the teaching of the apostles, The high priest consequently began to lose courage. As early as the time of Stephen's ministry as deacon, a fell in the eastern quarter of Sin could no longer contain the multitude of believers, so that they had to extend their huts and tents beyond the city, across the Vale of Cedron to Bethania. Annas was like one possessed. He was obliged to be confined, and he never again appeared in public. Caiaphas became like a madman devoured by secret rage. Simon of Cyrene went to the apostles after the Sabbath, asking to be received among the baptized followers of Jesus.